Hello, and a very warm welcome to another episode of from JKSC. Today, we are very happy to have with us Miss Venus Upadhyaya. She's a senior reporter covering India and South Asia for the New York-based Epoch Times. Born in Jammu and rooted in the Shivalik Hills, she belongs to the Dogra community, an identity that continues to shape her worldview and journalistic lens. Growing up with stories of her ancestral village nestled in the lower Shivalik ranges, she developed an early fascination with the layered history, culture, and civilizational depth of the region. Her work reflects this deep personal connection. Through her reporting, she brings clarity and context to the political and cultural currents shaping the Indian subcontinent. She's also the author of a research based series titled From Kashmir to Haridwar, which explores the history, culture, and geopolitics of the region with depth and nuance. A very warm welcome, Venus ji. Thank you so much for joining us today. How are you doing?
Thank you. Thank you, Urmi. I'm doing good. Thank you so much.
Oh, well, my first question is that you have reported so extensively on South Asia and its border regions. What do you think outsiders most understand about geopolitics in this part of the world?
I think the region, because of the borders that were drawn in 1947, has become extremely complicated. And I think a larger part of the world doesn't really understand the complexity of the border. Yes, people know that the borders are conflicted. People know that a large part of the border is disputed. People know the number of wars that have happened between India and Pakistan and the kind of conflict that has constantly persisted. But beyond that, people actually do not understand the context of the complexity, or people really don't understand that why the conflict has been so persistent. And people, I think the border, in a way, not only divided our land, and I would say that it was not just the land, it was actually a massive, very fertile river basin that originated from across the Trans Himalayan region, covered the entire Western Himalayan geography, and then, formed this massive Indus River basin, which has been the center of, civilization for the last 5,000 years. Um, Somehow the borders in the last few decades since independence, it degraded all that history. It made us blind to the continuity of a geography and the continuity of a history, and it made us very fixated on the partition, the border, and the bloody conflicts that persisted after that, and the kind of situation that continues to persist. So I think the tragedy of the entire the northern construct of Indian subcontinent is that once the borders were drawn, the continuity of the history, the continuity of geography, and the continuity of a civilization which has spanned across 5,000 years was extremely demeaned and degraded. So
True.
I think that part of it, the world doesn't understand.
That,
The world doesn't
absolutely.
understand. Yeah.
Absolutely. I completely agree with you. And that is the unfortunate part, I think. Before we dive into politics and strategy, could you help our listeners, as you rightly mentioned just now, geographically understand Jammu and Kashmir? I mean, I'm also talking about people within India and our international audience. As you rightly pointed out, a lot of people don't know so much, and they don't even realize the region includes both a formally recognized international border and the line of control. Can you just walk us through the terrain and how these boundaries differ and what this geography means on the ground?
See, the most amazing thing of any kind of a geography is its continuity. So when we talk about territories, or we talk about the land, the most amazing thing about land is its continuity despite the varying altitudes, or despite the changes that are happening in its terrain. Because despite those changes, there is a continuity. Now, that continuity part is very essential, has been very essential for civilizations, and I'm talking about this particular part in the context of for us to understand the international border and the disputed border. Let's first understand the geography, in the context of continuity. So when we talk about the Indus River Basin, and here, I'm talking about the current Jammu Kashmir, I'm talking about a larger part of Pakistan, I'm talking about the eastern Afghanistan, and even the Ladakh region through which the Indus flows. This massive region, is the Indus River Basin. And if you just take out a map and you look at it, you will see how there is a variation in the gradient. There's a variation in the altitudes. So for example, if you look at the place from where the Indus arises, the Sindhu, the Indus River Basin is called the Indus River Basin because of Sindhu. It arises from across the Himalayas, from the Trans-Himalayan region, from Tibet. And then, it comes from there, it goes through Ladakh region, it goes to Kashmir region. And then I'm talking about the main, the Indus River. And then it kind of goes from the extreme end of the frontiers, and then it kind of enters Pakistan, and then it flows to the entire length of Pakistan. And then you have, a number of tributaries and distributaries, which are arising from various altitudes of these Western Himalayas. Some of them are arising from these amazing glaciers that are there in the Western Himalayan regions. And then they crisscross their way through these various mountains and hills of different gradients. And then they pass the last range and they enter into the plains. Now, when they enter into the plains, they are bringing this massive, alluvial silt and the soil they're bringing from these Western mountains. They're bringing into the plains. And that's how they make the Indus Plain very fertile. That's why Punjab is very fertile. You look at all these border regions, and I'm talking about particularly the international border region. So the international border stretches from, stretches until Jammu. So in Jammu, there is a river called Chenab. Chenab falls. So if you look at the Indus Treaty, there are 6 rivers. Three of them are the Western rivers, and 3 of them are the Eastern rivers. So Chenab is, Chenab is a part of the Western rivers. And so the international border, it almost goes through the river Chenab into this largely a region called Akhnur, where we also have a large deployment of the Indian Army. And then from beyond that point, it is a disputed border, which is called the line of control. Now, so Jammu also has around about, 100 miles of international border, which means that when you cross the Punjab border and you enter into Jammu, and you have this national highway, you go through these regions like Kathua and Samba, you are actually going parallel to the international border. So the international border is a recognized boundary, which means it is accepted from both the sides. Now, if you see the terrain, you have mountains, you have rivers coming from the hills and the mountains, and then they enter the plains, and then the rivers are actually crossing through the border, which means that if you cross the Pathankot, you enter into Kathua, you enter into Samba region and all these regions, you will see when you take the national highway, you basically have to cross many rivers. Some of the bridges are like really massive, very long bridges, There are bridges. There's a longest bridge, which is about a kilometer, as long as a kilometer long bridge. And all those rivers, probably a lot of people who travel from Punjab or, New Delhi to Vaishno Devi by road, they would not really even think that they're actually, passing over these bridges, which are actually over the Indus River Basin.
Yeah.
And we actually don't reflect on how important these rivers are, because these rivers are coming from very high. They come to the plains, they fertilize the plains, and then tragically, they pass through the border. But before the border was there, it was a continuous land. Now, why the geography becomes very important? Because if you look at the terrain and the altitude, you will see that the altitude is constantly decreasing from high up, and then the mountains, and then the hills. And then from the hills, by the time you come to the Jammu region, you have these very small hills, and then becomes flat plains. So much so that the entire Pakistan that follows from that international border is basically plains,
Mm. Right.
right?
Right.
So now, once you cross the Akhnur, from there the terrain starts to change. You have mountains actually. As you cross the Akhnur region, you will see and if you're going by the road, say you're going to places like Sundarbani or you're going to Rajouri and all these places, and you take that road, which is also roughly the old Mughal route, you will see that the terrain is changing. The altitude is increasing, and it's continuously becomes more and more hilly and more mountainous. So, which means that the international border is largely through the plains, a non-mountainous region, and the line of control or the disputed border is through a very mountainous or a hilly terrain. So, which means that the security requirements or the security challenges on the international border are different from the security requirements on the disputed border. Now, that doesn't mean that one is less complex or one is more complex. Actually, the complexities are there. Different complexities are there in different places. And the rivers only make it extremely complex because it's like the rivers cannot be divided like land can be divided by boundaries. The rivers are not going to recognize the boundaries. The rivers are going to flow. So when the floods come, the rivers, irrespective of whether it is India or Pakistan, will be flooded. And they are going to flood through the boundaries or through the massive barbed wire that is there on the border, whether that is the international border or whether that is the LOC, and they're going to damage it. So, the complexity by those people who actually understand the security situation, they kind of appreciate the complexities that come about with the terrain or altitude. But as a layperson, I find this extremely amazing because if you look at history, you see the terrain was all about connectivity. The terrain was all about routes because the routes were all about rivers and mountain passes.
Correct. Back in the day.
So yeah, so before 1947, if you
Mhm.
talk to, senior citizens who, who've seen partition, who've seen, time before 1947 and the way they were traveling, they were basically just crossing the rivers. They were taking the rivers. They were going through the forest. They were crossing the mountain passes. And there was an amazing connectivity. For example, Ravi, if you see Ravi River, which forms the boundary between Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab, Ravi is an amazing river. You would have heard about Ravi in the folklore. There are beautiful songs on Ravi in the folklore. Um, but Ravi is amazing because Ravi is like a natural boundary between Jammu and Kashmir and Punjab. And more interestingly, it's like a tri-junction between Jammu and Kashmir, Punjab, and Himachal. So these three states have their boundaries, which are marked by Ravi. And when we study the history of the creation of Jammu and Kashmir state, Ravi actually has played a very important role in that.
Yes,
And
that's
and for the same reason, when you talk to these people who were traveling through these regions, Ravi was a very important part of the connectivity.
That's fascinating. Absolutely. I think the entire Indus Plain and all the five rivers, the Jhelum, Chenab, Ravi, Beas, and Satluj, it really has shaped everything from geography to the social structure, trade, as you rightly pointed out. So the geography of that region it's remarkable how it has shaped the history of that place, so significantly. So, as you were pointing out, the military strategy and security. So you did, as you rightly mentioned, that more or less the strategies for both the borders, it doesn't really change much. But how does the terrain from the plains of the Jammu to the high altitude mountains along? Because again, the geography is so different. How does it shape the military strategy and security dynamics between India and Pakistan?
See, I don't think that the security strategy is same for the international border or for the LOC for that matter, the BSF is, BSF patrols the international border, whereas BSF doesn't patrol the LOC. So the army is present on the LOC, so that is a very, very rudimentary difference that is there, which also shows that the makeup and the strategy and the priorities of BSF could be different from the priorities of army. So our policymakers, I think, they didn't deploy these two different defense forces just randomly. There would obviously have been a reason of why they have done it. So I won't say that the strategy is almost the same. I don't think we can generalize it that much. I think the strategy is very nuanced for the international border, and it is also very nuanced differently likely for the LOC. Now, so far as the terrain is concerned, as I said, the international border is basically plains, which means that you come from Pathankot. If you start to drive from Pathankot towards Jammu, towards your left, you will basically not see mountains. Okay. But towards your right, you will basically see hills. And at certain places, you will see hills, and then behind them, you will see taller hills, And if you take a detour, you can actually enter into valleys where you can also see peaks. So what I mean is, on the right side, it's Pakistan, it's international border. And on your left, if you go from Pathankot to Jammu, you see the Western Shivalik ranges. So now the security requirements, even for different regions of the international border, they differ because the challenges keep differing, right? Mm-hmm. Now, people who are infiltrating from across the border, if you just do some Google search, you can Google search and see how many attempts were there to duck tunnels, across the border in Samba, or what kind of infiltration was happening, say, across the region of Hiranagar. Or you can look at how the international border, say, in Araspura region, what are the challenges it has faced. Now, this is a continuous land. As you come from Kathua, then you come to Hiranagar, then you come to Gagwal, you come to Samba, and then, you come to Araspura. So this is like, I am defining them in sequence, but I'm very sure that the security requirements of each is different. Because in some regions, you may have a major river which is passing through this region. And the rivers, like they get flooded during the monsoons. But for a longer period of the year, they have these pebbled beds. And a lot of infiltration happens through them. Now, when the patrolling or the security apparatus on the expected terrain gets intenser, then the infiltrators find other regions, other ways to infiltrate. So I think this has been happening, but I think the major thing India did, in the early 2000s is that India erected a border fence. So there is a massive border fence, like a 20 feet tall border fence. And strategically, this border fence was not built on the zero border. You understand what is a zero border? Zero border is like how you see at Wagha. If you go to the Wagha gate and you just peep from there, you will see that there is a white band of line, a thick white band. And, people will tell you that, okay, if you step, you cannot step beyond that white line without a visa. Yeah. Because that just one step of your foot will make you land into Pakistan. That's zero border. But this fence is not erected on the zero border. This fence is strategically erected somewhere. At some places, it is 5 kilometers inside the territory. At some places, it is 20 kilometers inside the territory. So people have their land, including their fertile land where they're growing basmati, across the fence on the Indian land. And there are massive gates, which ensure entry to the other side. And whenever there's a conflict, or say there is a cross-border infiltration, or there's a security threat, or like there was the May conflict, or suppose there is a cross-border firing happening, then the borders close, which means that these gates close, which means like if there is a time in the morning when the farmers can enter and tend to their land, say at certain time in the morning until certain time in the evening, now they can no longer do. So that kind of a security apparatus is there, and whenever I have talked with people who have worked, like the law enforcement officials who worked on the land, then they have told me, okay, the border actually has played a very important role, because when the border was not there, there were smugglers who were smuggling all kind of things, including there was a different way that narcotics was operating across the border because there was no fence. After the fence was erected, it has substantially decreased, but it has not ended.
Mm.
Now there are other ways they are using to cross the border, like they are using drones to for narcotics. Then narcotics has also transformed into narco terrorism, which means that the terrorist activities and the narcotics or the smuggling of the drugs is combined together in some ways. So they have found various ways. So every time the law enforcement naps and closes their channels, then they always figure out other ways to carry out their operations. And that's what I think we have to fundamentally reflect on, that what happened in 1947, the drawing of the borders, was not just drawing of the borders. I think borders were secondary. It was like a drawing of a perpetual conflict.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. I completely agree with you. Right, Venus ji. I'm going to come to a very important aspect, which is the Indus Water Treaty. So the India has recently signaled their intent to revisit the water treaty with Pakistan following the Pahalgam attacks. So for listeners who are unfamiliar with it, could you explain what the treaty governs, how it divides the river system, and why it has become such an important geopolitical flashpoint?
Yeah, see, I think if you remember the first answer that I gave, I said that this entire land of Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, Ladakh, almost the entire stretch of Pakistan, Punjab, and eastern Afghanistan, this entire massive thing is the Indus River Basin. So, which means that this is a fertile basin which is defined by Indus and its tributaries and distributaries. So, which means that it's important for civilization. It's important for people living in this entire terrain. Which means that's important for irrigation, which means it's important for water, for living, for sustenance. I mean, I don't need to say that water is essential for life. So obviously, whenever civilizations evolved, they evolved on the banks of the river. And if there has been a continuity of civilization in the Indus River Basin, we talk about Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, that was also Indus River Basin civilization. So from that on, if civilizations in various forms and have evolved or devolved in this entire Indus River basin, it has happened just because of the river, just because the river was providing for life, it was providing for sustaining life and people and societies, in these basins. So the river is essential, right? Which says, okay, people say this river is our lifeline. Can you think of Punjab without its 5 rivers? It won't even have its name. So you can't think of Pakistan without Indus. Pakistan without Indus would be a desert. That's the reality. So similarly, you cannot think of Srinagar. If you have ever been to Srinagar, you cannot think of Srinagar without Jhelum. You cannot think of Jammu without River Tavi. Like the Jammu railway station is called Jammu Tavi railway station. So you cannot think of this entire geography without its rivers. And why? Because rivers are sustaining societies, communities, life, irrigation, agriculture, hydropower, all kind of contemporary industries, contemporary growth development. Everything is relying on that. So that is the context to the Indus River Treaty. But when the Indus River Treaty was signed decades ago, the context of this entire land. It's the context of this entire land, both socially, politically, economically, socio-economically, socio-politically. It was not the same. Right? At that time, when the treaty was signed, India and Pakistan were a few decades old. Right? The populations were substantially lesser than what the population is today, both of India and Pakistan. Now, if you look at in all these decades, the population has substantially multiplied. So what this means? This means that, first of all, Indus is the main river of Pakistan. It is responsible for irrigating Pakistan, for providing Pakistan water for its development needs, for its sustenance, and for everything. Similarly, the other tributaries and distributaries of Indus are doing the same work in Jammu and Kashmir, in Himachal, in Punjab, in Ladakh, and all these regions. So the water is essential. So that is why there is an Indus River Treaty, because when the borders were drawn, there would be a conflict. As the development and growth happens, India would build hydroelectric plants, Pakistan would build hydroelectric plants on rivers which are on a continuous geography, and there would be more conflict. So therefore, to ensure that there is no conflict on water, the Indus River Treaty was signed. So what it did is it divided the massive river basin, its distributaries into two, the western rivers and the eastern rivers. So the western rivers, it was decided that the water from the western rivers would go to Pakistan. So the western rivers were Chenab, which I said, you have this Chenab River in Jammu, from a little ahead from Chenab, this LOC starts. And then you have Jhelum and you have Indus. So when I say Indus, I'm saying the main channel of the Indus River that comes from Tibet. And if you've been to Ladakh, you will see the beautiful Indus River from there that enters into Srinagar, into Kashmir. And then from Kashmir, it enters into the Pakistan-controlled part of the region. And then it walks through the entire length of Pakistan, irrigating Pakistan and making Pakistan's Punjab a fertile land. So they gave these three rivers to Pakistan, which means that India cannot build any major project on these three rivers. And the eastern rivers were given to India. The eastern rivers were Ravi and Beas and Satluj. So now if you look at the water volume of these two sets of western rivers and eastern rivers, the western rivers has the majority of the volume. So say about 19 to 20% is with the eastern rivers, and say about 79 to 80%, is with the western rivers. So keeping in mind Pakistan's context, that there is no other major river irrigating Pakistan, the Indus River Treaty provided the western rivers to Pakistan and provided the eastern rivers to India. Now, that was the context. As I was saying, it was just a few decades after, barely. So in the early 1960s, when the treaty was signed, we were very young nations, right? Our populations were comparatively less to what we have today. So the treaty was at that point of time designed for that population, when our socioeconomic condition, our sociopolitical condition was very different than what we are today. So today, with the massive increase of population on both sides, and with that, the energy needs on both sides are different. Pakistan is building so many hydroelectric plant stations on its side of the rivers. And India also has a need to do that, because our populations have substantially increased. So, and then there were many other lacunae in the Indus Water Treaty, because the Indus Water Treaty was not designed for today's contemporary society. Whether we're saying, okay, our energy needs are substantially higher, and there are many other needs are substantially higher. So, in a way, the Indus Water Treaty had become very redundant. So I think India was mulling over this idea to basically call back the Indus Water Treaty, to call back its participation from the Indus Water Treaty. But the Pahalgam attack became a triggering point for that. So I think the Pahalgam was just a trigger. It was not that the Indus Water Treaty was running well and there was nothing wrong with it, or our policymakers were not identifying that the treaty has become redundant. Even if they had not abolished their participation in it, at least there was a need to basically renew the treaty, or to make it more operational and more valuable and more efficient for the contemporary societies in the basin. I hope that answers the question.
Absolutely. That is so fascinating. And the thing is, as during the beginning of the conversation, as we were discussing, people know so less about the geography, the implications, the social political structure, and most importantly, the history of the rivers, both politically and geographically. That it's absolutely fascinating to listen to an expert like yourself. And I mean, I didn't know a lot of the things that you just mentioned. So for me, it's been
Yeah, there is another thing. There's
yeah.
another thing. You see, the Indus Water Treaty that was signed, it doesn't consider the groundwater sources. Can you imagine that?
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah, so the groundwater source is very integrated with the hydrogeology. So hydrogeology is, so it's not like, the mountains, the rivers, the hills, the glaciers, the land, the underground water sources. They're not like separate entities. It's a very integrated system, right?
Correct. Hmm.
But the treaty didn't consider any of these. So fast forward today, when we are talking about the climate change challenges, we're talking about all kind of challenges. Himalayas are facing so many challenges, so many
Correct.
natural disasters are happening, and so many things are happening. So obviously, the treaty has become very redundant. And when something like that becomes redundant in a highly strategic region, when I say strategic region, because it's a highly militarized region,
Yeah.
it's a region which has faced a lot of conflict. It has a history of continuous conflict.
Yeah.
And when you have something which is redundant, but something which is of such importance, when it becomes redundant and it becomes an issue of conflict, that means that you cannot basically cooperate to come up with a mechanism which will be beneficial on both the sides. Okay, my interest and your interest of my people, the life and protection and security of my people, and life and protection and security of your people. Both these are equally important, right? But when something has become redundant, which means that the new challenges that are coming, you're not prepared for it. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's just like an old organizational mechanism. Suppose that you were working in an industry, say your grandparents were working in an industry. Now imagine the organizational frameworks in their time. Do you think their organizational frameworks or the managerial frameworks or the operational systems that were existing in a grandparents' time would work in today's time? Then how come something, which is spanning across such a massive geography and
Mm.
across such an, dynamic terrain, and something as serious as a river treaty, which was, signed like so many decades ago? Society has massively transformed, everything has transformed, and we still expect it to work and function in the same way because its rules and regulations are like from decades ago. How can it function? I mean, it's very illogical. I actually really do not understand that. How can they even make it a point of conflict? So, therefore, I believe that protecting a treaty which is redundant is itself an attack. Do you understand what I'm saying? It's like I have a home. I need a contemporary security mechanism because the challenges and issues that my society is facing are different from what they were, say, 2 decades ago, 3 decades ago, 4 decades ago. And the protective mechanisms were different. Context was different. Now the context is different. So therefore, the mechanisms are different. When I'm being prevented to employ new set of mechanisms to be more efficient, or new set of mechanisms which are required for my contemporary society, when I'm prevented from doing that, that means you're encroaching upon my security. You're encroaching upon my right to protect my people in the most efficient way, which means you're attacking us. So, so therefore, I say that when somebody is protesting the, that no, the treaty is fine and the treaty should be there, I think that's not an agenda. I think protesting that the treaty was sacked in itself is an attack on India's security interest.
And sovereignty, of course. I mean, I couldn't agree more. Right. Next, actually, we come on. I think all of us are aware that as far as international discourse is concerned, almost most of the focus is on the Kashmir Valley, while Jammu often receives less attention. So, from your perspective, especially as someone from Jammu, how strategically important is the region in terms of geography, connectivity, and topography? Do you think?
See, Jammu has been, I mean, Jammu is obviously an integral part of India, so it's obviously very important. Um, I used to think about Jammu, because when we were growing up in Jammu and we were in school, I studied in a very good school, one of the best schools in Jammu at that point of time. And still in that school, I remember our teacher would say, "Oh, you know what? Jammu has no history." It was not that Jammu didn't have history. It was that Jammu's history had not been narrated, or whatever was narrated was very linear or was very limited, you know. But that didn't mean that Jammu didn't have a history. So now, as I've grown up, I often think about it and then reflect why did they say what they say? And I realized that that happened because, you know, Jammu's history was overtaken by the post 1947 narrative. You know, it was overtaken by the post 1947 narrative of conflict. Um, Jammu's history and Jammu's connectivity was very integrated with the rest of the, you know, history, its land, its geography exist in connectivity with both the high terrain on one side and the plains on the other side. Tragically, the plains on the other side are across the border. And so our sense of Jammu, our contemporary sense of Jammu is this highway. Then you go into the city. Then from city, you either go to Vaishno Devi or you go to your homes or localities or settlements. That's a concept of Jammu. Or you go to some temples. It's a city of temples. But no, Jammu is a part of a continuous geography. And the geography is extremely essential, has been very essential in the last course of 5,000 years of the Indus River civilizations. But it is undiscovered and it is unnarrated, largely unnarrated. And I think that exists because a lot of that history exists in continuity with history across the border. And I say that, for example, Jammu, for example, if you suppose you just study about Gulab Singh, okay, and you study about Gulab Singh as a warrior, uh, leave around everything aside. You just study right from the time when he was 16 years old and he started to fight wars and he started to look for employment with these jagirdars, in the Punjab kingdom. And finally, he ended up, in the court of Ranjit Singh. You'll just follow his movement on his horse, leave behind everything else. Just follow his movement on his horse. And you will realize what an amazing geography he was traveling through. And why was he traveling? He was traveling because it was connected, because it was known. There were people who had traveled through those routes before, and there were people who traveled through those routes after him. For example, just to give you an example, the Diwans of Jammu and Kashmir came from a region just across the border from this region called Aminabad and Gujranwala. And so it's, the Gulab Nama is written by uh, 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 Diwan Kirpachand, I think. If I may be even wrong. The book is here. So Gulab Nama, yeah, is written by Diwan Kirparam, not Chand, sorry. It's written by Kirparam. And his Samad, they call it Samad. It's not right to call it grave and it's not right to call it Samadhi. But his Samad is in a temple called Divana Temple in the old Jammu city. You look at the history of his ancestors, you look at the history of the Diwan family, last like 4th-century history of Diwan family. Their family starts from the time of Babur, and their ancestor came from somewhere in Gujarat, Haryana belt. And this person was working with Babur, and then he came to the Punjab plain on some assignment, and he got married over there. And then the generations continued from there. And then, further on, one of them came to be working with Gulab Singh. So when Gulab Singh became the Raja of Jammu in 1822, then this person became the Prime Minister of Jammu, because he was working very closely. I'm talking about Kirparam's father, Jwala Sahai. He was working very closely with Gulab Singh. But they were from Gujranwala Aminabad belt. Even today, if you Google search and look at the Havelis of the Diwans of Jammu and Kashmir, you can still find a lot of pictures because some of the ruins of those Havelis or some of those Havelis in bad shape are still existing over there. And then a large part of their home was existing in the old town where you had the Diwan Badrinath school. They had a massive home about 100 rooms, which they later converted into a school. So you just look at them, and you look at how this family created its wealth. It got lots of jagirs from the British. After that, Anglo-Sikh War happened, and then they got a lot of jagirs from the J&K government. Before that, since they were working from the Babur times, they had a lot of property, a lot of power, because they had property, power, and jagirs through various rulers from the last 400 years. And they were moving across this. There's a very interesting anecdote. So when the Amritsar Treaty was signed, it is said that Gulab Singh came when he had to enter the kingdom. He first halted at Jasrota. So Jasrota, if you Google search, you can see it is somewhere in the border region. Jasrota is not really mountainous, but you can say it's a little hilly. It's at the last rug of the Shivaliks before it becomes completely plains. Jasrota has been a very interesting kingdom. So it is said that Gulab Singh and Jawala Sahai, they came through this. And at Jasrota, Gulab Singh basically awarded Jawala Sahai for facilitating the Amritsar Treaty between the British and the Dogras. And he was handsomely paid about 10,000 gold coins or something like that. And then, he was also awarded a lot of other things. The details of it you can easily find out online. But just imagine the connectivity. So they are coming after signing the Amritsar Treaty. They first come to Jasrota. They halt over there. Then, he is awarded over there. And from that, they move on to Jammu. So that's why I'm saying leave behind everything else. In the last 200 years, if you just follow the horses of the Dogra warriors and the Dogra rulers and how they were moving across this terrain, they were actually moving right from Punjab to as high as Gilgit and, these high frontier regions where they fought many wars in the mid 19th century, until about 1963 they were fighting wars. They fought this 1841 for Leh Ladakh, Tibet, the war that they fought. And then, after that in 1963, they fought the Battle of Yasin, which means that they were traveling from these low terrains, which mind you, Jammu is about 1,000 feet above sea level, whereas Gilgit is about 11,000 to 13,000 feet above sea level. And they were moving from this terrain to that terrain. There were no roads, there were no modern connectivity, but they were moving and they were winning wars.
Amazing.
So they were also facing attacks. Let's not glorify them in that way. They were also facing attacks. Initially, they also had to lose wars. That is why they did many punitive strikes and they won wars. But all this was happening across this amazingly dynamic terrain, and they were navigating through its extremities, which means that the land was extremely connected.
Correct, absolutely. And is this whole thing properly documented? By documented, I don't mean folklores but official documentations, or if not, why do you think it's not? Because this is such an important part of our geography and history, I think.
I think it is documented, but it is scattered. And I think there is a need for contemporary research on it. So what you should be actually asking me is, why are modern authors, modern writers, and modern researchers not re-exploring the history of the integrated land?
Yeah,
Because we're
exactly.
so taken aback by the borders.
By the
The
border.
borders have made us blind about the continuity of the geography. So for that matter, you asked me about Jammu. So if you
Mhm.
see the Indian map, you see Pathankot and you see Jammu. Can you see it's like a neck? Like if we have the head of India and then we have the body of India, you look at Pathankot and Jammu, it's like a neck,
Yeah.
you know? And the amazing thing is, half of it is, most of it is, maximum part of it is the Western Himalayas of Himachal. You look at the Himachal part in it, so this neck is basically a tri-junction between Punjab, Jammu, and Himachal. And you look at the substantial part of it is the Himachal part, which means the Himachal part is all mountains. And the rest, which is a narrow, like little, like navigable thing, which is between Punjab and Jammu. So when they made this border, just imagine, is it that they randomly constricted it, or is it that the demographic or religion based demography was the only context to making this neck?
Well, that's, I think, a separate conversation, what prompted who took these decisions. But anyways,
So Jammu is very strategic. Jammu is a very,
yeah.
very strategic region.
Exactly. And I really sincerely hope that, there's more content and more authors, historians, researchers. And we need contemporary research, not things that are, because as you rightly said, the society has evolved, the people have evolved, and everything is different to what it was in the 40s, 50s, 60s to what it is now. So yeah, we definitely need more conversation, not just about the border, but about the region and the place. So, staying put with Jammu, so you have written about the historic water bodies of Jammu. We did talk about it, particularly the bowlis, with
Yeah.
over 240 sites documented in Duggar Ki Bawliya. Uh, what do these structures reveal about Jammu's historical relationship with water, settlements, and society as a whole?
Before we start that, you can find that book in Jammu. It is written by Shiv Nirmohi. He has written
Mhm.
this book on Jammu ki Bawlis. It's a very I would say it's a very sincere documentation. It does not go into details, but actually it has documented those 200 plus bolis, which I think many of them would no longer be existing. Um, so for those who are interested in the history, you can actually find this book in the bookshops in Kachi Shavni or Pakadanga markets of Jammu. So it's written by Shiv Nirmohi. Now, coming to your question. Now, if you understand the hydrogeology of the region, you would understand why the bolis are very important, because um, so there are two, three aspects of it. Like if you go to Ladakh, you will see that the landscape is very decorated by these stupas, right? You see those structures.
Structure.
Um, Now, the stupas are of two kinds, votive and commemorative. So similarly, the bolis are also like that. You can say that in the lower Shivalik ranges, um, the bolis have basically replaced the stupas. But bolis are not visible that prominently because stupas like exist above the ground, right? They have an elevation. Stupas have an elevation, whereas bolis have a negative gradient. They are inside the earth. So, but they're also votive and commemorative. So it was like that, like you would see in different parts of India. Um, Giving water was considered to be a very pious act, was considered to be a very dharmic act. So, as part of our upkeep, our religious upbringing, different rituals, water was considered very important. So, therefore, I have seen that at many places, people would save money and then, or suppose they're earning this much and they would say, okay, I'm going to keep this much of profit for charity. And what did charity mean at that point of time? Charity mean this kind of acts. The acts of giving in that society were defined like that. So you see, when there a lot of migrations happened, during the Islamic invasions, a lot of bowlis also got built under different contexts. They were votive, commemorative, and they were also mostly built on the routes, again, defining connectivity. Because when you're moving through these mountainous routes, you need sources of water. So, first of all, they would provide you water. Second, they were also acting like milestones. So, basically, you find Baulis not only in the Western Himalayas, but you find them in Central Himalayas also. You go to Kumaon region, you can find Baulis constructed in the same way. So it's something like the Bablis of the Aravali region, but Bablis of Aravali region are like massive and extremely decorated and like, they are like step wells, but Bablis are basically aquifers. They are surface aquifers, which means that there is a natural spring over there. And what the ancients did is they built it in a form that there was a constant circulation of fresh water. So, like they built a trough in the earth, they lined it with stones, flat cut stones, and they left a channel outside. So there was a channel of natural water coming to that place, and there was a channel of it going out. So there was constant circulation of water. Water was never stagnating in a bauli. So and then the baulis were of different kinds. There were baulis which were only for drinking purposes. There were baulis which for bathing and other activities of the household. There were baulis which were considered very religious. So I've seen baulis which are very decorated with religious motifs. If you go through Shiv Nirmohi's book, you can actually also find baulis with inscriptions, though I haven't seen them myself. Now, hydrogeologically, I think it is very common sense to understand that, as I said, the Indus River Basin is not just the Indus River, its tributaries and distributaries, but it's an entire integrated cycle, a mechanism, an operation of water, which is running from the space through the mountains, from under the earth to on the surface. And so there's a massive, amazing, dynamic, integrated circulation of water that is happening, right? Uh, and Baulis were a very integrated part of it because they were a very sustainable way of water conservation. I mean, if you look at the Baulis, you can see they were so intelligent and so simple in constructing it that a Bauli built would never die until and unless you close that channel of circulation. So what I'm now seeing, like I recently went to these mountains for a personal trip, and there is a Bauli I've been watching since my childhood, from my grandfather's time. We would descend the hill with our grandfather, and before crossing a river stream, there was no bridge over it. This Bauli would come under a mango tree. And, as a child, I was always very curious, and we would look into it, drink its water, and, halt there for a while to rest before we climb up and share a story or a joke or just a simple talk. Now, for the first time, this time in my life, first like a decade or 2 decades ago, first I noticed they built a bathroom near it because they suddenly realized that women need privacy, to have bath. So they built a bathroom. Now, which means that the people were supposed to have water in a bucket from this bauli and then go into the bathroom and then, have bath. Now, gradually, that system went out of the lifestyle because people constructed cement homes and brick homes, and they started to have bathrooms and toilets inside their home. So you need a constant supply of water, which comes right to your home. And so there's no pipeline in a home, in little farmer's home across the stream. For the first time I saw what somebody has done is they have attached a pipe to the bauli and built a kind of a little bridge over the stream, and then it goes right into their home. So I mean, all kind of things are happening with baulis. Big baulis which were beautiful and magnificent, I think they're trying to conserve them, but I don't know how successful they are. But a lot of other small baulis which were scattered throughout the terrain, a lot of them are basically dying, and it's sad. So as I said, there's a circulatory mechanism, which means just imagine you have a trough. Okay, the trough is like a like an inverted pyramid, but without a pointed vortex. So it's like its walls are tapering, and they are laid with stones, and you have a source of fresh water coming in, and you have a channel which is letting the fresh water go out, so that you always have fresh water in the pool, constant and fresh, because the water is circulating. It's coming in and it's going out. So in the pool, there's constant flow, constant pool of fresh water. When you close that channel, either of that, the inlet or the outlet, you are destroying the entire system. And that is what is happening. It's a very common sense thing, but they're not understanding it. So uh, it's a tragedy. I hope that somebody does a deeper research into how bowlis are important for the hydrogeology of Western Himalayas.
Absolutely. I think one thing that I am convinced is that a lot more research and a lot more focus has to go in what's happening in that part of the world, which doesn't concern the border. Whenever we speak about Jammu and Kashmir, the first thing and the last thing in everybody's mind it's to do with the border. But there's so much more to it. There's so much more to it. Uh, right. So the media, coming discussing about the media plays a very powerful role in shaping geopolitical perception. So from your experience, where does journalism get, how do you think journalism gets this region right? I think a lot of it we've already discussed. And where do you think it falls short?
I think it's a very tough region. There's no doubt about it. So reporting in such a complex region is not an easy task. You know,
Mm.
I would say, so basically understanding the borders, understanding the complexity of the border, understanding the conflict of the border is one aspect of it. But being on the ground, facing those complexities, negotiating through them, working with various stakeholders, you will have to work with the law enforcement, you will have to work with the various stakeholders, in the governance system. You need to understand how people are working, what people are facing on the ground. You need to understand the context and the background of each of it. It's a very complex region. It's a very complex region with some societies, and some societies of Jammu and Kashmir, you have multiple layers of conflict. And when I say conflict, I'm not saying conflicts which are overtly existing. You know, since partition, there are many layers of trauma, many layers of conflict that these societies have experienced. But a lot of it has gone unreported. You sit with some grandmothers or grandfathers, who have seen partition, and you talk to them, or you talk to people who have faced the wars after that, whether that was the four wars that have happened in Jammu and Kashmir. You actually go and talk to people who were on the ground, who have faced it. You will experience a very different set of reality. You talk to people who have faced the recent 2025 May conflict. You will see what a difference in perspective exists across different periods and different wars and different periods in the same region. So I believe that journalism should be constructive. Journalism should be able to contribute. Journalism should be able to answer questions. And journalism, above all, should be able to ask the right questions. All this happens with a lot of ground experience, a lot of training in the skills, craft, a lot of constant effort that you need to make, to understand the ground situation. Um, I would say there are some amazing journalists who have done reporting from the region and that have done good work. Uh, but I think grassroots journalism or community journalism, community media really lacks in this region, and it's a very difficult it's a very difficult thing to happen, because you need to build a lot of capacities for that. For example, interestingly, a few years ago, I went to a village and some puja was happening, and a Panditji was sitting over there, young Panditji. So I started to talk to the young Panditji, and then he told me that he's a journalist. Because when I told him I'm a journalist, he told me he's a journalist. And then I came to know that a number of these small Facebook, YouTube, medias are coming up, and people are doing their journalism. So you can actually, in Jammu Kashmir region also, in the past decade, a lot of interesting, these little medias are coming. They're giving their input on Instagram or. So sometimes you don't get report in the bigger media or the bigger media, your reporters are generally, if some attack happens, a militant attack happens somewhere in the mountain regions, then the reporter will be rushed, to that region. But somebody who's on the ground will have a different perspective. So I request that people follow these small JNK channels on Instagram or Facebook and YouTube, and you gather different perspectives to understand the situation. I hope that there would be investment in media education, in like good institutions of journalism. When I was in JNK, there was no course of journalism in Jammu University. So if we had to study journalism, we would have to go to Srinagar. Srinagar, Kashmir University had journalism course, but Jammu didn't have. Then later on, Central University of Jammu now has, I think, a media MA in journalism. We can pursue, and then there are a number of other small institutions which are offering. But at my time, there was nothing. So I had to basically leave home to study journalism. But I think the situation is changing as well. Now there are a number of regional channels. I think Srinagar, Jammu, Ladakh, CNN Network 18 has created its regional channels. So earlier it was only Doordarshan, which had, say, a Dogri channel or a Kashmiri channel, like that. But I think now CNN 18 also has. But my request to the viewers would be that tap into the Instagram, small channels, small news uh, networks, and don't be taken aback by the lack of language skills or, develop your own filtering, and but follow these. They're very interesting and watch how they evolve.
Right. My last question for this session is again, I'd like to end it with so beyond official histories, how has society in Jammu preserved memory through folklore, family stories, and cultural practices? What do these lived narratives reveal that formal accounts sometimes miss? What do you think? What would be your thoughts on this?
I think a lot of that is untapped. For example, if I sit with
Yeah,
my grandmom,
I
my
thought so.
grandmom would have so many stories. But it's
Absolutely.
just because I'm a journalist, I'm a storyteller. I love storytelling. So I always tap into it. I go to my aunts, who are in their 80s, and then, I try to know from them what were the bhajans or songs or folk songs my grandmom was singing. And then I try to record them, or I ask them that if there was a story they told me in childhood, if it was about a particular temple or a special site somewhere, then can I visit it with them again? And then I do it, but with my contemporary knowledge and contemporary skills, my exposure, my modern day education. And then with my journalistic skills, I try to dig into them. And then I see that there are amazing things waiting to be discovered throughout the landscape of Jammu and Kashmir. But just because the border, the conflict, the constant, uh, threat perception that exists, and somewhere it certainly exists that people don't even identify it. So people want to make their life secure. When people want to make their life very secure, then that means there's a constant insecurity. There's a context to it. So there is a lot that, if you're always worrying about your security, for example, people in the border regions, then they would always think of, like if people have to think that, yes, they have to think about their children's education. And like people in the border regions tell me, nobody wants to marry off their daughters to the sons, in families which live on the border region. That's a that's a reality. And so there would be a lot of other social backdrop to this, right? So when people are constantly facing that, it would not come to their mind that let me discover something, let me discover a story, let me figure out my history. Because to do that, you need to have a mental, intellectual
Yeah,
space,
I agree.
where you're relaxed or where you are yearning, where your yearning is more than uh, your day-to-day living or your day-to-day worrying about what's going to happen next. So I think it's because of that. But I think today's India is different. Today's India is more confident, more assertive. So I hope that the young Indians would basically invest in understanding their civilizational pedigrees, their family histories. They would document their folklore. They would sit with their grandparents and other senior citizens in the community, ask
Yeah,
them questions, which help them to explore the world inside as much as they want to explore the world outside.
yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Venus ji, for that absolutely fascinating 1 hour conversation. It's been very interesting for me and very educational for me, as I said. I on that note, we are going to conclude today. And again, thank you for your time. And I look forward to meeting you sometime very soon again. And to all our listeners, I hope you enjoy the session and have a lovely day and a great weekend. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you.